Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us in from. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream show, where each week I tackle some of the biggest questions across the full go-to-market team, including sales, marketing, customer success, CS and account management, product, channel partnerships, and the executive sponsors that are so important to driving growth in and around the data center industry, regardless of whether you're from a data center operator like a co-location or wholesale or hyperscaler, edge or modular company, or maybe you're from a technology company that sells to or partners with data centers, or perhaps a facilities company that works with data centers, or maybe you're in construction or real estate or sales and marketing outsourcing of the data center industry. Either way, I am thrilled to have you with us for this week's live stream. This week, I'm going to be tackling a handful of questions, including how to deal with decision maker turnover when selling mission critical data center solutions. What happens when your main point of contact leaves and they're no longer with the company? What do you do? Next up, we'll look at how to improve data center lead qualifications so you can make sure that you're investing your precious resources in the right marketing qualified and sales qualified, most of all, opportunities that are primed to become your next best clients, that onboard smoothly, that expand smoothly, that are no retention risk, that end up being great case study clients. And then we'll look at how to market and sell cutting edge IT licensing, hosting, cybersecurity, and cloud solutions from a more broad-based solution provider that works in and around the IT industry. Following that, we'll take a quick break from our sponsor, and then we'll come back and look at 3 more questions. The first one up is prospecting tips for data center providers. Then we'll look at how to make customers aware of your data center, and then we'll wind down this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream with one additional question on how server co-location operators can get the attention of the CIO, Chief Information Officer, or CTO, Chief Technology Officer. So without any further, let's jump into this week's first question. So first up, how do we deal with decision maker turnover? How do we deal with turnover? How do we deal with people coming and going? How do we deal with decision maker turnover when selling mission critical data center solutions? Well, this starts pretty early on in the buyer's journey. The first thing is to recognize that the way people research and make their decisions in and around the data center industry is very different than it was as recently as 3, 4, 5 years ago. If we were talking about this 3, 4, 5 years ago, more than likely your stakeholders, the people on the committee, your decision makers, you would have gotten to meet a lot of them, most of them, maybe all of them, about halfway through their buying process. Those days are long gone. Now, by the time they get to us, they're like 80 or 90% of the way through the decision-making process. Gartner puts that number currently at 83%. That means that they have completed 83% of the research and comparing options and evaluating pricing that they're going to do before we even know they exist, before they want sales contact. So the first thing is to recognize that and figure out a way for our company, for our sales team, for our marketing team, for all of our important folks to have a role in the now digitally driven, self-propelled buyer's journey. In order to do that, we can no longer be perceived as traditional salespeople. We need to be seen more as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, thought leaders, trusted advisors. And the way we do that is by having amazing, impactful content and experiences that not only answer all of their biggest questions, but helps them think ahead about what step 2, 3, 4, 5, what the whole path looks like throughout the buyer's journey, and anticipates what they're going to need next based on the role that they have, the job function they have, and the kind of company they come from. And the way we know that is we look at pattern recognition, who our best clients are. We look at the case studies, and we work backwards, and we figured out what their buyer's journey is, the research and comparing of options, the whole research and decision-making process that they go through between when they discover challenge or a stressor they need to deal with, a goal they're trying to achieve, and when they ultimately decide on a particular company and a particular solution. So how do we deal with turnover? Well, the most important thing is to recognize that as we're building out our presence in not just the last 17% of the buyer's journey, but the full buyer's journey, we need as many people from that team as possible showing up. How do we do that? Great, helpful, educational, remarkable content. And it may seem relatively low tech, but it goes something like this. Person number one discovers your company, discovers your premium content offer because they don't even know your company exists yet. You're helping them solve some particular problem. So maybe there's an ebook, a guide, a planning template, a report, maybe a webinar. They subscribe, they sign up. The next thing you know, you're sending them an email that says, who else at your company also needs to be at this, needs to see this, needs to attend this? Who else on your team needs this as well? And it goes something like, hi, Bob. Hi, Sally. We're so glad that you signed up to download. We're so glad that you registered for the webinar on blankety, blankety, blank. You know, your biggest goal or challenge that you know they have that you're providing a solution for to provide educational content. But, Bob, but, Sally, did you know that to overcome this challenge, to achieve this goal, it takes a village? You need a multidisciplinary team, including professionals from operations, technology, compliance, facilities, whatever. So who else with that in mind, who else on your team could benefit from reading this, could benefit from attending this, could benefit from watching this? What I'd recommend, hit the forward button on your email, write a sentence or two about why this matters, and forward away. And just below that, they'll have the title of what the offer is, some bullet points on what the offer is. And you would be shocked how this form of email nurturing, email marketing that has been available in and around the data center industry probably the better part of 20 years at this point, you'd be shocked at how well this continues to work. Any prognosticators that have declared that email marketing is dead or on its final lap, they don't get it. You don't realize how simple this is, because the most important thing you can do to avoid dependence on the decision maker or one person that you have a contact with at that particular company is to make sure that you're never in that vulnerable position of only having one contact person at that company. And it starts with having a great, helpful piece of content, a great, helpful event or experience. Because at that point, Bob or Sally, or whoever discovered your offer first, is not sticking their neck out and saying, hey, I'm going to bet my career by saying we should go invest this huge project in this one particular company. All they're saying is, oh, I found this cool ebook. I found this cool planning guide, this cool planning comparison guide, template, webinar, what have you. I think others on my team could benefit from that. And that's when you know it's starting to work, is when you see your email notifications, when you're looking at your marketing technology stack or whatever you're using to capture these leads. And you're like, oh, 3, 4, 5, 7 people from the same company are all downloading this, are all registering it. I bet they're talking about us, which is incredibly important, because we now know that people have gotten so gosh darn risk averse that no one wants to make a decision by themselves anymore. Even if you manage to get to the decision maker first, they're still going to push it back down to the rest of their team. So it's incredibly important that you use content and events and experiences to help spread your educational content, help spread your subject matter expertise and your thought leadership. And in terms of figuring out like who is where, when someone is leaving, when someone's getting promoted, at the risk of preaching to the choir, a really super simple thing is every single contact that you have that converts on a lead for a download or registers for an event, or you meet in real life or word of mouth, like, of course you need to connect with that person on LinkedIn. Because when you're connected with that person on LinkedIn, you can see that, oh, Sally got promoted. Let's hit the celebrate button and congratulate Sally. Oh, Sally's going to another company. Okay, well, now I need to figure out in the company that Sally is leaving, who are the other stakeholders that I already know? And is my surface area big enough in that account, or do I need to keep expanding that? Who's potentially replacing Sally? And oh, Sally's moving to another company in the same industry. Is there an opportunity that Sally can take the work that we've already done with her and the goodwill that we've built up with that relationship and take that to the next company as well? So yes, it is incredibly important to deal with decision maker turnover when selling mission critical data center solutions, but it starts with them seeing your company as the go-to experts in your space. And it starts with always having a team of advocates on your side, not just a primary internal champion. Next question. How can we improve what we do with data center lead qualification? This is a fantastic question. And when it comes to lead qualification, we really need to start by defining what it is that we mean by a lead. Because when I talk with go-to-market professionals in and around the data center industry, there is a very wide definition of what a lead actually is. Some of them, when they say lead, really means sales opportunity, meaning that it's someone from the right kind of company that's in the right frame of mind to have a productive conversation about potentially doing business with your company. They know your company exists. They know kind of sort of what you provide. They kind of sort of have an idea what they want. And at the end of that conversation, you can kind of sort of put it on your deal board and have a forecasted close date and a forecasted potential dollar value of the deal. But before you even get to that, you have an opportunity to engage with someone that's super interested in talking with you in the context of a sales conversation. That's what a lot of people mean by lead. But when it comes to like marketing technology and pay-per-click advertising and basically how the whole journey works, a lead most of the time is just someone that went from anonymous to now being a known person that's raised their hand and saying, yeah, I'm interested in that offer that you've put in front of me. And what's super important now in a self-guided buyer's journey, where like 83% of the action is happening before someone is willing to speak with your sales team, is we need to have some really good, juicy, valuable offers to put in front of prospects way before they're ready for a sales conversation, like ebooks, downloadable guides, videos, podcasts, at the risk of getting really meta, webinars. These are all ways for someone to raise their hand and say, oh, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I'm not ready to talk to sales yet, but I'm super interested in that topic. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I'm not willing to jump through all these crazy qualification hoops yet, but yeah, I want to see that content. I'll give you my virtual business card information for what's on the other side of that landing page, what's on the other side of that event registration. So first, we need to get on the same page about basic definitions about what a lead is, what a marketing qualified lead is, what a sales qualified lead is, which often is called a sales accepted lead, an SQL for qualified, or a sales accepted lead for SAL. When most people in a relatively small company that don't have a really built out, expansive go-to-market team talk about lead, they're really talking about opportunity. They're talking about someone that's ready to talk to a sales team. But the challenge is it takes a lot of work now to get someone to be in that position to have that conversation in the right frame of mind. It's all about finding the right person in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that they see your salesperson as an expert and not just a glorified order taker, not just someone who's going to read them the information that they could already find from your website. So now that we have that context out of the way of just how different the journey is today compared to 5 years ago, and how the buyer is truly in the driver's seat, and that changes the nature of what sales does. Sales needs to come back way earlier on in the buyer's journey than they've ever had to do in the past. In turf, that a lot of people would have said in the past, hey, isn't that marketing's job? No. It's marketing and sales collaborating together throughout the full buyer's journey. So sales needs to come back way earlier on and participating as a teacher, as a thought leader, as a subject matter expert, or at least a concierge of those resources. And marketing needs to be prepared to take the lead through to the opportunity stage much deeper into the journey than they ever have done in the past. Because again, we are no longer in the driver's seat. The buyer is in the driver's seat, and we need to adjust accordingly. So when it comes to qualification in this context, we need to get super specific about who it is that we want to be engaging with. So at a company level, we need to define their ideal client profile, their ICP. And then once we have their ideal client profile defined at a company level, then we can set about defining the individual stakeholders that we need to build relationships within those accounts. Those are called buyer personas. And we typically, especially early on with limited resources, you need to make sure that you prioritize and pick your favorite child. Who's your primary buyer persona? Who's your secondary buyer persona? Maybe there's a tertiary buyer persona. So once we know the company, once we know the people, that will help us get much more clarity on lead qualification. Are they from the right company? Are they from the list of the 500 or 1,500 or 40 companies, whatever it is that we're prioritizing around our account-based marketing motion? And then within those companies, are they the right kind of role, or at least kind of sort of close enough? Like, you may have the CTO as the primary decision maker, but if the company's relatively small and there's like 3 people that work in all of IT, it's not going to be really difficult to get from someone that reports to the CTO to the CTO, assuming that you do a good job on discovery and exploratory conversations and you really understand what's going on. So yeah, we need to understand what at the company level, what qualified looks like, at the individual job function role, what qualified looks like. And then we need to figure out, based on how big the deal is, how quickly we're going to hand off to the sales team. Typically, the bigger the deal, the more strategic the deal is, the more the alarms will go off immediately at the point of initial conversion to pass that lead to sales and to motivate, incentivize, encourage, mandate, whatever you want to call it, for sales to jump on that lead within minutes. We all know the stats, like of leads that you try to connect with within minutes are 10 times, 40 times, 100 times, whatever it is, way more likely to take the call and allow you to do successful qualification, as opposed to leads where a form is filled out and you get back to them 3 days or 3 weeks or never later. and it has the opposite effect. So if we want to be able to better qualify leads and improve what we do with lead qualification, we need to recognize that we're no longer in the driver's seat. We need to get out of the sales box and out of the vendor box as quickly as possible, so that all of our customer-facing team members on the whole go-to-market team are seen as teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, thought leaders. We're at the minimum really good concierges of those resources. And then we need to make sure to qualify that we're crystal clear on our alignment definitions about the target companies, the roles within the companies, and the speed at which we're going to engage and the thoroughness that we're willing to engage with those leads if we don't connect the first time. How many follow-up attempts we're going to make, what the follow-up attempts are going to look like, and how we're going to add value beyond just trying to book a meeting with them, which is kind of a selfish ask. So that's my 2 cents on what we need to focus on for lead qualification in the data center industry with today's modern buyers. Next question is how to market and sell cutting-edge IT licensing, hosting, cybersecurity, and cloud solutions. This sounds like a cloud service provider or a managed service provider, a CSP or an MSP that is likely selling to small and medium-sized businesses, because typically the small and medium-sized business is the kind of client profile that's going to be most interested in that single point of contact, because they don't have a big enough sophisticated IT department enough where they can really go for best individual provider in each of those. So if you have the ability to cost effectively and do a good job with taking care of licensing needs and hosting and manage cybersecurity as well as cloud solutions overall, then yeah, you want to figure out who your target company is. And the way you would usually do this, assuming you're already an established business, is you look at where you've done best. You look at where your best case studies are, what kinds of clients have had a great onboarding experience with you, what kinds of clients have expanded the kinds of services that you've offered them in the past. By the nature of having those 4 different services, cross-selling and expansion revenue becomes incredibly important. And where have they gotten the most value? How quickly and efficiently have they gotten from initial value to intended value to extended value? All of that taken into account will help you work backwards and figure out like what your criteria is for your ideal client profile. It'll allow you to build a target account list, an account-based marketing list of defined companies, of a tangible list of a couple dozen or a couple hundred, or maybe at the absolute most a couple thousand companies that you want to get your offers in front of. And then who are the individual people within those companies to prioritize around buyer personas of what each of them care about, and then make sure that you're developing a journey map and a content strategy for presenting the right offers in front of the right kinds of person at the right time in their journey, with the idea that we pull them in by their virtual shirt collar and have a great relationship with them throughout the full buyer's journey as early as possible. During that first 83% when they're doing all of the self-directed research and they're allergic to sales contact, how can we make sure that we have a great relationship with them? Because if you don't, they're going to get this information, this content, these comparison guides, these great educational event webinar experiences. They're going to get these elsewhere. And whoever is providing that and spending the most amount of time with them in those 28 touch points between problem, challenge, solution, and purchase, whoever's spending the most time with them and coaching them on how to evaluate the alternatives, that company for sure will be on the short list, and they may completely neutralize all of the other competitive options. So it's in your best interest to be super specific about the kind of company, who those companies are, the people that are in with those companies, and then prioritize your efforts to build incredibly helpful educational content and educational webinars and event experiences that allow you to educate and build trust that scale with those folks in a way that stays with them throughout the journey, accelerates the sales process, and gets them queued up to see you as the go-to expert in your space. And with that, we're going to take a quick break from our sponsor.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Okay, Joshua Feinberg here again from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Weekly Q&A show. The next question that I'm going to address today is prospecting tips for data center providers. That's a fantastic question, because the way we go about prospecting for anything in and around the data center industry needs to be very different today than as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. 5 or 10 years ago, you would get up on the roof of your building, get out the megaphone and shout, "This is what we do," and hope people gathered around you. Probably not quite that literal, because if people saw you up on the roof of the building, you'd attract different kinds of attention that you probably didn't intend to. But the idea of outbound interruption-based marketing and sales was very much alive and well. If I think about relatively early on in my career in IT sales and marketing, whether it was SMB, mid-market, or enterprise, it was very driven by offline events, people going to conferences. There was direct mail, long, elaborate, expensive pieces of direct mail, as well as the minimum viable direct mail with postcards. There was print advertising in newsletters, newspapers, trade journals, trade publications. All of these were and billboards, all of these were very much alive and well. And back in this time, before all of the self-directed research, when salespeople made outbound phone calls and eventually outbound emails and outbound LinkedIn connections, it was still somewhat of a novelty, and people weren't totally flooded and completely turned off. And most of all, they didn't have that many alternatives. We now live in a world where, and this has been changing for a while, things like caller ID, the DVR, being able to block people from your email box, being able to block people from calling you on your smartphone. All of these have queued up a world in which the buyer is now in control. And if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, which is now part of Gartner, at that time published research showing that about 56% of the buyer's journey was over before you got to meet a prospect. That means they were about halfway through the sales cycle, halfway through their research and decision-making process before you got to meet a prospect. So okay, well, we miss out on half, but we still have the other half. We still have almost half of the journey that we can spend time with them. That's changed a lot, and not for the better. Well, it's changed for the better from the standpoint of the buyer, but from the seller, it's gotten way more challenging. The latest research from Gartner found that 83% of the buyer's journey is now over before you meet a prospect. That means for the first 83% of the journey, it's all self-directed research. Blogs, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, attending webinars, asking questions on social media. very, very allergic to sales contact. Anything that your prospects can possibly do to circumvent, to go around the need to spend time in a sales process, they're going to do. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because the way that we book travel, completely self-directed now. The way we make major purchases, the last couple times we've leased a car, the last times we've been in that, we've tried to do it without going to the showroom completely. As we all know that that's an experience that needs to be modernized. Even residential real estate is facing tremendous disruption in the way that commercial transactions have happened. I just saw earlier today a beloved music store that sells music. I don't know how many of you know my background, but as a teen, early 20s, I played the keyboard in restaurants and hotels, a little bit of wedding kind of stuff. So it was sad for me to see that a beloved musical chain of stores in the United States, after 100 years, was shutting down because they've been, I hate to say Amazonified, but yeah, online is brick and mortar is really, the world has changed. So when it comes to prospecting tips, we need to recognize that the world has changed and meet our prospects where they are. Where are our prospects? Well, in the first 83%, they're just looking for helpful information about addressing their goals, getting their questions answered, dealing with their challenges, dealing with the stressors, dealing with the things that are causing them to lose sleep, having them to pull all-nighters, missing out on time away from loved ones, having to have vacations that end up being unfortunately jokes of a vacation, where they end up having to work a lot of that time. So what can we do to potentially provide unique insights that help our ideal buyers understand that there could be a better way to address these kinds of things? That's what prospecting looks like in today's data center marketplace. Instead of traditional outbound calls being focused on booking a meeting so you can pitch your product or services, if you're going to do outbound at all, what we're trying to do is get the right people to engage with our early and middle stage offers, getting them to consume a guide, a research report, an ebook, a template, a comparison guide that we know could be incredibly helpful for someone like that person in that kind of company. Getting that person to register and attend a webinar like this could have a game-changing impact on how you prospect more efficiently in today's self-driven buyer's journey, where the buyer is so much in the driver's seat. So what that means by definition is the nature of what a sales development rep, an SDR, does is changing. The nature of what an account executive, an AE, does is changing. In both cases, you're coming back much earlier on into the buyer's journey, and what you may have in the past said was marketing's job. What it really comes down to is now everyone needs to be collaborating to make sure your go-to-market team, your company as a whole, has a massive presence throughout the entire journey, throughout all of those 28 touch points, especially the 22, 23, 24 of them that are happening before sales contact. And the way you do that is getting really tuned into who they are, what they care about, and how you can help them do their job better. That's what prospecting looks like. And how do you get people to advance from that educational content? Well, at the risk of getting super meta, it's stuff like this. It's coming to a live virtual experience where they spend time with you in seeing you as a teacher, as an instructor, as a professor, as an educator, and they learn from you. And then they start to say, oh, yeah, these guys, these folks know their stuff. What do they do again? Oh, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, I'll sign up for their free trial, their free audit, their free consultation. They'll click the button, and next thing you know, you've accelerated an early stage lead all the way into decision stage, opportunity stage, where they're ready to talk with someone one-on-one from your sales team. But early on, when it comes to prospecting, we need to meet those prospects where they are, not where we'd like them to be out of the gate. Most people aren't going to elope on the first date. It's a funny Ashton Kutcher movie, right? But it's probably not how most of your data center buyers are going to navigate their research and decision-making process. So we need to put deposits into the relationship bank account before we try to draw out, because we know if we try to overdraw on a bank account where we don't have good deposits, it's never a good outcome. So those are some prospecting tips to take to heart in and around the data center marketplace. Next question, how do we make customers aware of our data center? Yeah, that's a fantastic question. the most important part of making customers aware of our data center is to recognize that if they are looking for a data center and they're looking for your data center, there's a really good chance that you may have reached them too late. That's not to say you shouldn't make a noble effort at hanging out your shingle and bidding on some late stage decision keywords and doing some search engine optimization around some late stage decision keywords. But the problem is, if they just show up at the end and we didn't have much of a role in their awareness and their consideration process when they were going through the formative stages of learning about how they were going to address a goal, how they were going to get their questions answered, what they were going to do to address this huge challenge that's standing in the way of their company's growth, that if they screw up could threaten their career. If we weren't there with them when they were going through all these trials and tribulations, the thing is, probably someone else was. And it may be a direct competitor of your company. It may be an indirect competitor, meaning like a lot bigger of a company, a lot smaller of a company, or in a different geographic region, or it may have been a non-business model competitor. What's a non-business model competitor? It's someone or some entity that is creating great content, great experiences, great events on the same topics that your buyers care about, but they don't do the same thing that you do. But nevertheless, because we all want to have a relationship with prospects in the awareness, the consideration, and the decision stage, not just the decision stage, not just the final 17% of the journey, they're pretty formidable competition. When I do consultations with go-to-market teams in and around the data center industry, I say, like, if you're building from scratch right now, instead of building what might be considered a traditional marketing team, think in terms of building a media company for your most important buyer persona that creates great, remarkable, helpful, educational content for your most important buyer persona's biggest goals and biggest challenges that they're struggling with. So yeah, that's where understanding who your buyer personas are and prioritizing, so you know very clearly who your most important buyer persona is, and really, really zeroing in on what that person cares about, what they're stressed out most about, how you can help guide them through that process. That is incredibly important. So if you want to make prospects, if you want to make potential customers aware of your data center, it starts by being very specific about who those potential prospects, who those future customers and clients are, and being very deliberate about your ideal client profile, your target account list, the roles within those companies, those job functions that are in those companies that you need to create awareness with, and then start with where that person is, not where you'd like them to be during the bottom of the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning, or the 4th quarter of the game, or the last 17% of the journey, but start with where you know that person is right now. Researching and comparing options. What can we do to make sure that we have a really significant role getting out of the vendor box, being seen more like Big Four consultant and a lot less like a aggressive, commission-hungry salesperson? What do we do to completely turn the tables? Because if we want to have awareness in a meaningful way with the people that now research and make decisions, 5-10 years ago, you might have said, these are the edge cases. Most people don't do this. Well, what ends up happening, think about this logically. Your decision maker, your CTO, is 65, 70 years old and they retire. Are they going to be replaced by another person who's even remotely digitally resistant? Or are they going to be replaced by somebody who is way more plugged into the way that Gen X and millennials and Gen Z research and make the purchase decisions? So we need to be realistic that in and around the data center, it's extremely likely that nearly all of your prospects and customers are glued to their smartphone all day long. They're asking dozens of questions all day long from Google, Siri, Alexa, Cortana, and of course now Copilot. So how do we make sure that we show up when these questions are asked? How do we make sure that we have an active role throughout the 100% point of research and decision making and comparing options, not just the last 17%? How do we make sure that we're in there and we're the ones that are coaching them on how to evaluate all of the different options in front of them, how to evaluate what's going on in the space, showing them best practices of how others in similar roles in similar companies have navigated the process? That's what it looks like to get awareness of your data center in today's modern decision driven process. So we need to be there throughout the whole time. So that way, when they're at the point, somewhere in the middle in the consideration stage when they're comparing the different solutions that are in front of them. They say, oh, wow, this company is super helpful. They have amazingly smart people when it comes to this stuff. I keep looking at all their great content, all their great podcasts, all their great webinars, all their great white papers. What is it that they do? And that's where the light bulb goes off. And that's where they're coming to you largely pre-sold. And you'll know it's working because there's multiple people from the same company that are looking and engaging with your content. You'll know it's working because you show up to the meeting and there's 3, 4, or 5 people sitting around the table or the virtual table, and they are literally quoting you. They're quoting your thought leadership as the way that they've evaluated this whole problem. That's how you know it's working. That's what prospecting looks like for attracting the right kinds of buyer personas that you want to make aware of your data center. So the final question we're going to address today is, how can server colocation operators get the attention of the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, or the CIO, the Chief Information Officer? How can server colocation operators, how can colocation providers get the attention of the CTO or the CIO? That is a fantastic question. And the way we address that today is very differently than we would have 5 or 10 years ago. The reality is colocation is becoming incredibly commoditized. And I've done talks about this at conferences for years. I've produced hosted webinars on this topic for years of how colocation providers can find the right niches, the right niche segments, and avoid commoditization. Because in a lot of ways, the market for colocation, to me, looks a lot like the commoditization that MSPs, that managed service providers, and web hosts were facing about 10 years ago. So we are at this existential moment now where companies that are single location, small colocation providers are going to continue to struggle to have enough scale to be effective, both in terms of their offering, in terms of single location versus multi-location, and being able to afford to build a cost-effective way of attracting, engaging, and delighting the right kinds of clients that they want to grow with. So the first thing is to take stock of where your company has been most successful. Of your existing clients, where you're dealing with a CTO or CIO or someone that reports directly to them, chances are those are if you're a relatively small company, you're probably dealing also with relatively small companies, just simply because the larger the company gets. The extreme example is when you're dealing with like a Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 CTO or CIO. There's a really good chance that unless you're like a hyperscale provider, you're probably not getting anywhere near that C-level for decisions on basic, relatively inexpensive commoditized colocation. You're probably at the most dealing with a VP of network operations or something like that, or network engineering, or something like at a VP or director level or something like that. So what's really important, and to be self-aware, is where your company has won in the past, where you've succeeded in the past, where your best case studies are. And with that in mind, you're probably looking to do a client cloning machine. How do we clone your best case studies? Well, it starts by figuring out the attributes of the companies where you've done best. What are their sizes? What are their business models? What are their industries, their locations? Is it just limited to a local area, or are there companies, CTOs or CIOs from all over the country or all over the globe that have found it super interesting to co-locate within your facility or facilities? So we need to go about developing an ideal client profile for understanding the attributes of the kind of companies that we want to attract. And then we need to figure out within those companies, the CTO, the CIO, is that the primary buyer persona? Let's go with the idea that it is. So if your CTO or CIO is your primary buyer persona, what are the biggest goals that particular chief technology officer or chief information officer are working on? What's the consensus when we look at least 5, 10, 20 people in that space about what they need to get done to be successful in their job? And along the same lines, what are the biggest challenges that CTO or CIO is currently facing? What are the biggest stressors? What are the biggest things that are causing that CTO or CIO to have to do all-nighters once in a while, to miss time away from their friends and loved ones, to ruin vacations, to really, really stress them out to the point where they know that if they screw this up, their career could be in jeopardy? Once we know the consensus on their biggest goals and challenges, it becomes much easier to develop a content strategy to develop unique thought leadership, teaching, thought, trusted advisor, kind of subject matter expertise, to get in front of the right people for the right reasons and the right places. And the right reasons is exceptionally important. Depending on the company size, it's can be anywhere from very important to like mandatory for us to get in with CTO or CIO or someone from their team way before the point they know they're looking for co-location. Yeah, sure, we want to make sure that we have some coverage on topics for your geographic area around co-location, both on search engine marketing as well as search engine optimization. But that alone is not going to be sufficient. That only gets you a relationship in the final 17% of the buyer's journey. We need to be involved in the full 100% of the buyer's journey. So how do we get in early and often in the right way so that our company, so our team, so our individual experts within our company are seen as the go-to experts in the space? And it's all content. It's all making sure that when they go looking for information to help them do their job better, to address their biggest challenges, that you're not only able to answer the questions that they have, but you're able to anticipate 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of where they are, where they need to be going next, based on the pattern recognition of knowing that, okay, the CTO or CTO comes from a company that's roughly this size and that in a certain kind of industry or business model, a certain kind of location. So it's very reasonable for us to expect, based on the journeys we've observed other people go through, that this is what they're going to want to see next. And then after that, and then after that, and then after that. From the 28 touch points that are between complete stranger and purchase decision, we need a way to make sure that we're into as many of those 28 touch points as possible throughout the full buyer's journey. So if you want to get the attention of the CTO or CIO, don't start by shouting, "Hey, we have cheap co-location. Want to book a meeting? It's on sale this week. Here's a coupon." That's not what we want to do. We got to get out of the vendor box. We can't be seen as cheesy salesperson who just has commission breath. We need to be seen, our sales team needs to be seen more like Big Four consultants. The interactions need to be so valuable that it feels like they're getting free consulting. That's how you get the attention of the CTO or CIO. And then second, recognize the smaller the company it is, the more it's more than okay to get people that may be 2 or 3 levels down in the organization from that CTO or CIO. What do I mean by that? If you're targeting CTOs of companies that have anywhere from, say, 50 to 200 employees, and there's a grand total of like 25 people in the entire organization, the IT organization, and there's only 3 or 4 of them that would have anything to do with co-location. Yeah, sure. It's great of those 3 or 4 people. It's great for your first contact to be the most senior person that's either has purchasing authority or is very close to purchasing authority. But the whole team is only 3 or 4 people. So if we do this the right way, if there's a great research report, a great planning guide, a great ebook, a great webinar, and Bob signs up or Sally signs up and they get an email back within a couple of minutes that says, "Hey, Sally, great to see that you signed up on our webinar on co-location, on best practices and for financial services, choosing the right co-location or outsourced data center," whatever it is. But we all know, Sally, it takes a village. It takes a whole team to make this happen. And companies like yours that are doing well, that have great uptime, that are taking care of security, that get rid of latency, they're typically multidisciplinary teams that involve people from these 3, 4, 5 different roles. So given that, is there anyone else on your team that ought to see this resource, that ought to watch this recording, that ought to attend this webinar? If so, I'd recommend that you hit the forward button on your email, write a sentence or 2 about why this matters, and let them know about this great resource as well. You'd be shocked how often that could get you from the intern all the way to the VP of IT or CTO or CIO in a relatively small company. And again, in a relatively small company, in a mid-sized company, like 11 to 50 employees, 50 to 200 employees, where the entire organization is probably a couple handfuls and the people that would deal with co-location is maybe 2, 3, 4 different people. Sure, yeah, in a perfect world, we'd like to get the perfect person first, but it's not going to be very hard for great content, great webinars to spread among those team. And you'll know it's working because you look down at your lead notifications and revisit notifications or registration list. You're like, oh, yeah, 3, 4, 5 people from the same company. They're talking about us. Awesome. Because we all know everything's decision by committee today. So yeah, and you'll know it's really working because by the time they're at that 83% of the way through the journey and you meet them for the first time, they're quoting your guide, they're quoting your research, they're quoting your webinar. So they know they've been using your entire framework to guide the whole research and decision-making process. So that way, when they bring this up with their CTO or CIO, if that person wasn't the first point of contact, you're so far in there that you're for sure on the short list. And in certain situations, you may be the entire short list, meaning that your helpful educational content, webinar experiences, all that stuff together may have completely neutralized all the competitive options for the co-location. So those are some strategies in today's data center marketplace to consider when you're putting together a playbook for how co-location operators, co-location providers can get the attention of the CTO or CIO in the right way. So that was the final question that we're going to be addressing today in the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To be notified about our next episode, our next session of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you visit our website at dcsmi.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter. Until next time, I wish you great success in growing your data center related business. Let us know how we can help.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.